eagle who kind of hopelessly mocks him and makes fun of him. He's not smart. He's not romantic. He's not handsome. Um, and yet the eagle has got his best interest at heart, I suppose. Number three, the science fiction question. Um, yeah, I think again this division between fantasy and science fiction. Certainly, there are elements of fantasy in here, um, but is it science fiction? I mean, is it? Does it have science and technology and scientific theory to help advance the plot and put it in a different place? So I don't know. I mean, and I didn't present that as an absolute truth. I mean, that's just something that I thought was worthwhile that I read in an article. I think you could argue for it or against it for sure. But here you've also pointed out that the reason the Wicker House is moving so quickly, perhaps, is to explain why the rumors are flying out, and I do think that that's right. And I think that earlier when the Eagles talking about acoustics and the science of sound, I think that's kind of what he was trying to get at. Your discussion of the description of the locations. Yes, the Temple of Venus looks like you would expect the Temple of Venus to look. I agree with you there. Um, and especially with the story of Troy in it. The House of Fame, right, with the Mountain of Ice, as we've pointed out, um, and the engravings of the name in the ice. And I like that you point out the House of Fame is right in the middle between heaven and earth, and the land and the sea, and um, the heaven and hell, and everything else. That it's the House of Fame is ferociously neutral. It's not, because the rumors are not all false. They are not all malicious. There are lots of true things that come out of the House of Fame. So it merely acts as kind of a conduit. And so I think you're exactly right to sort of see that its position is important, because it propels things from down to up and up to down and east to west, and goes in all directions without discriminating for better or for worse. So, and at the end, you say you're not sure you grasp all the imagining. I tell you what, I am sure that I don't grasp all of what's going on in the House of Fame. But it's I kind of like that about it. I mean, this is part of my weird pathology. Is I like the uncertainty and the mystery and things that just can't easily yield. Julie, you've got some comments, and again, right, this is an elusive poem, ALL, elusive, not necessarily ILL, although I guess it's that too. And yeah, you point out that you like Greek mythology more than Roman. For Chaucer, for most of the people in the Middle Ages, they're actually going to be a lot more familiar with the Roman than the Greek. The Greek stuff kind of has fallen away in the Middle Ages, partly because there aren't a lot of people in medieval Europe who can read Greek, and partly because of the loss of texts in the fire at Alexandria. There's actually a real dearth of Greek writing. They didn't have much original uh, Aristotle and Plato, for example, um, or the playwrights, or Aeschylus, or any of those guys, because they just didn't. And when they did have some things, if they were in Greek, they couldn't be translated. So they certainly are going to reference the Romans a lot more, and you'll expect to see that throughout the semester. The, yes, the comedy is difficult to get. You pointed out one of Chaucer's pet words, which he uses a couple of times, and it can mean quaint in the way that we use quaint as being kind of cute, like a quaint cottage. They also it can be clever, cute, charming, whatever. But yeah, it also, as it says, can be bawdy wordplay on the word quainta, which can mean female genitalia. And we still have this word, and I won't go further than to say that now it starts with a C instead of starting with a Q. And if you stop and think about that, I think you'll know what I mean. Um, and yeah, you'll see that, especially in the Miller's Tale, that word comes up. So yeah, he is no prude, not even close. And I think we'll run into some things that'll prove that to you for sure. Susanna has commented too, and she's in agreement on the first point. Yeah, I like that you thought of Sam the American Eagle from the Muppet Show. Sam is very dour and very serious. Um, a little bit like this, although this eagle kind of jokes around. I mean, I don't think Sam has got the same sense of humor. Um, but yes, he's not a he's not especially kind or forgiving to Chaucer, although he does it with good humor, I think. Uh, I like the idea of comparing this to Alice in Wonderland, and I think that Becca's going to pick up on this later. Um, whatever logic governs Alice in Wonderland, I suppose, is the kind of logic that governs this poem, which is to say, say almost none, or if there is one, we can't really distinguish it. And again, I would tend to think of Alice in Wonderland as being more of a fantasy piece than science fiction, um, but there are elements, obviously, of both. Yeah, you pointed out the Rainbow Bridge, and I'd never thought of that, and I don't, honestly, I don't know if that's something that Chaucer would know about. Nevertheless, the concept, yeah, I mean, the idea that rumor is everywhere and fame is everywhere. And Susanna, you said that you're hoping for a quiet life and not to be splashed around the tabloids, which you'll probably be fine. But remember, in the House of Fame, there were people who specifically asked not to be famous. I don't want to be known. I want to be anonymous and quiet. And yet they were trumpeted just as much as anybody else. So wanting fame does not guarantee that you're going to have it. Not wanting fame does not guarantee that you're going to be free from it. So I thought that was a good point that you made about the Rainbow Bridge there. Okay, good. Moving along. Uh, Becca's response. Yeah, once again, the disorientation here is certainly something that is intentional. He's trying to keep you off kilter. He's trying to keep you a little bit dizzy, and you're right. I think just kind of going with it, especially with this poem, is really the only thing you can do. Um, And I think you're right too. When you said the poem is very elusive about saying anything definitive about literature or history, uh, yeah, right. And I think maybe what the definitive thing he's saying about literature and history is that neither is definitive, as much as we would like to convince ourselves that they are absolute, and that they contain perfect, unharmed nuggets of truth in them. I think honestly, what's going on is that he's calling into question their firm foundation, such as we've kind of come to accept it. Going to the idea of the foundation of ice, um, and yeah, he does. Uh, Drop some philosophy, and we're not getting very deeply into the philosophy, but he's got some stuff going on, and Plato and Aristotle, yes, but also Boethius, who's one of his favorites, and some other Christian philosophers. He gets into this argument of the prime mover, this sort of the universe must have a first mover to get into motion, and if that's true, is that the same as God? And what are the implications of that? And he talked about that some with the eagle. We'll see that more in other places. We'll see it in the Nun's Priest Tale, in the Canterbury Tales, and we'll talk a little bit of philosophy. But he does Greek philosophy, but it's normally by way of Romans, as I say, like Boethius especially. Yeah, the eagle I think is comedy, and I like the comparison to the Cheshire Cat, that you're not going to get a straight answer, even though this guy is here to help you. Excuse me. This guy is here to help you. He's gonna rib you pretty hard at the same time. He's not gonna let you have an easy time of it. So yeah, why is he doing it? Well, why does the Cheshire Cat torment Alice? Um, we don't know, and we're not necessarily going to be allowed to know. And I think we're supposed to be put more in the position of Chaucer, the narrator, than we are of the eagle. We're supposed to be experiencing sort of the dizzying confusion that Chaucer is experiencing. And I like speaking of the comedy with the eagle, I just like that he's scared that this giant bird has picked him up and flies him way up in the air. And like anybody, he's scared to death. He thinks he's gonna fall or be pulled apart by this giant bird of prey. Um, yeah, so the science fiction. So they're right. This is the great never-ending story parallel here, which I will take to my grave now that you've brought it up. And but the same idea that right, he's being taken to learn something, and I mean, this is his ambition, right? Jeffrey says, "I want to learn something. I want to learn a certain thing," but right, he's not going to learn necessarily the thing that he thinks he wants to learn, and in fact, what he learns may be something about the futility of trying to learn, or something to that effect. But right, you talk about science. The eagle talks about picking up the stone and dropping it. Yeah, this is not. It's not Newtonian gravity, but remember, there were. Gosh, were there Greeks who dropped things from towers, and certainly a little bit later than Chaucer, we're gonna have people dropping stuff off the Tower of Pisa. But the idea, I mean, the Greeks had already come up with the idea that if you drop two objects from the same distance, even though they weigh differently, they'll land at the same time. He is in a way talking about gravity. It's just that he's not got a term for it. He doesn't think of it as a force in the way that Newton does. But yeah, no, Chaucer, again, I'll just repeat myself. Chaucer is interested in science. He's going to introduce scientific thinking very often. I think, too, one thing that I hadn't really thought about, but when we think of science, we're always thinking the latest thing. If you were writing a paper for a science class, if you used a source from 150 years ago, it would be considered ludicrous. You don't do that. That doesn't count anymore. It's been usurped by whatever's come after. In Chaucer's time, though, the old scientists were as reliable, if not more so. The old physicians, someone like Galen or Hippocrates, would be considered to be more authoritative, probably, than a modern physician. So our model of science, because of the scientific method, which doesn't come about until the Renaissance, is based on everything new replaces whatever came right before it. Chaucer's not really thinking that. He's not living in that world. So when the eagle is throwing around science, he's going to call back to really, really old theorists and physicists and things like that, and that's a perfectly good thing to do. The columns and the pillars, yeah, right. Within the House of within the House of Fame, you've got these pillars, and they do seem to be representative of strength, and it's interesting that the pillars are of different metals, and I don't know enough metallurgy to know which ones are stronger and which ones are more reliable and which ones are less reliable, but they all seem to be fairly reliable. But it's also worth noting that these strong metal pillars are inside of a big stone house, which is on a mountain of ice, which is melting. So even though your reputation might be firm within the House of Fame, the house itself is not very stable. Another thing too, and I am going to go back and check myself, and I'll let you know if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure it's the House of Fame that is assembled with no mortar. I believe, I will look it up and I will send you an email if I'm wrong. But I believe that the House of Fame is just block piled on block. And then it's gilded on the outside. It's got sort of this layer of gold. But I'm pretty sure that it's supposed to represent this idea. On the one hand, of course, some stone structures don't use mortar and they're very solid. But I think in Chaucer's case, he's trying to represent it again as one more hint of instability there, that if somebody kicked out one of the stones, the whole thing could, I think, probably fall apart. Yeah, Callie is giving you a shout out for your acknowledging the confusing nature of the poem, and yeah, don't. And by the way, this is probably about the worst that you'll read for confusion. This is probably the hardest text that you'll read in here. So you can breathe a sigh of relief after this. The text for next week is certainly a lot easier in that way, and I think really pretty much everything else is.